Welcome to the Excruciating Minutiae Podcast, where we obsess about sports, pop culture, and politics, but mostly sports. Here are your hosts, Randy and Steven.
Hello, everyone. This is Steven. Here is the second part of our Super Bowl 53 preview. This year, we've seen some states now legalize sports gambling. For years, it was only in Las Vegas that sports gambling was legal. State of New Jersey took the federal government to court and won their battle, and they were able to open up sports gambling this year. There have been another 6 states that have added sports gambling as well: Delaware, Mississippi, which is right near you, New Mexico, Pennsylvania, Rhode Island, and West Virginia. There's a number of other states that have already approved it and are working on making it legal. And there are other states that have legislation pending in their state houses trying to legalize sports gambling. So we're finally catching up with the rest of the world with sports gambling. We were talking over the phone the other day. I mentioned to you that the latest issue of ESPN, the magazine, is almost 100% dedicated to sports betting. I will be headed to Atlantic City this week, going there for work, but while I'm there, might as well place some bets.
Might as well.
Yeah, might as well. And I'm going to probably drop a couple $100 on some bets, some straight bets, and some of these crazy prop bets, just because I can. It'll give me something to root for on the game since I have no dog in the fight, so to speak.
You've been to Las Vegas, correct?
I have.
But you did not bet at the sports books when you visited Las Vegas.
I did, but not on pro football.
Okay. What did you bet on?
I'd made 2 bets. I made a bet on college football, which I lost. I took Oklahoma. I remember the team that I took. I forget who they were playing, but they were like, it was one of those early season games. It was first week of October that I was out there. They were favored by like 32.5, and they had been racking up wins by huge margins at that point. And of course, I put a Benjamin on them, and they didn't cover. They won, but they didn't cover.
You always remember your first time, right?
Yeah. I also placed a bet on a English soccer match, which I also lost. And that was an interesting one in that I bet on a team to win. It ended in a draw, and so I lost.
So you're 0 for 2 in your pro sports betting career.
In my
legal sports betting. Let's clarify.
I have placed many other bets over the years that have been much more successful. Unofficial, not for actual dollars, quote unquote.
I've seen the sports book in Vegas because I'd made a trip to Vegas. I've been there once. And I saw the one at Caesar's Palace, and I was just in awe. How many TVs, how many people. And it was in the middle of an afternoon, and I can't remember what time of year it was, but there were games on all over the place, and it wasn't a special event. It wasn't a football, NFL Sunday football. I seem to remember it was prior to the NFL season starting, because I seem to remember prepping for a fantasy football draft while I was there. But there was no real action going on in the middle of the week. There may have been.
Was it hot?
It wasn't. Yeah, I think it was. I know it was headed into pro football season because it was. You and I actually ended up doing a fantasy football draft because I did it from my hotel room when I was in Vegas. I do remember.
Oh, that's right.
Yeah, I do remember this. So, But in the middle of the week, whatever was going on, there were still tons of people there, and they had stuff going on, and there was a lot of action. I just remember thinking, oh my God, what must this be like? Maybe during March Madness, for instance. I recently made a scouting trip to Mississippi, which is not that far away from me, to check out some sports books there. I went to a couple casinos and found them to be a much smaller venues, obviously, in Mississippi than what I saw in Vegas. But looks like, there weren't nearly the people, and it wasn't nearly the level of excitement I saw in Vegas, but looked like it would be interesting. And I think I made the comment to you, I'm glad I don't live closer to that, because I could see myself being drawn to that type of atmosphere. Though Louisiana, I believe, is one of the states that is probably in the process of trying to maybe bring a sports book here at some point. That would not shock me.
Well, here's the other piece to that. I'm living in New Jersey. Because I'm living in New Jersey and I set up an account with one of the sports books, I can place bets from my phone as long as I'm in the physical area of New Jersey. So I don't even need to go to the book if I don't want to.
You can do it in your boxers from your sofa in the middle of the cold.
That's what they want.
And it's cold.
That's correct.
Where you are right now, it's cold, is it not?
Not yet, but it's going to be, yeah. You'll probably have sports betting in Louisiana relatively soon. I already have it here. We'll have moments, I have a feeling, on a podcast where one of us will just go, I'm going to go place a bet on that.
That's possible.
During the podcast, because we can.
Because we can. So you sent me a link to where you'll be at, and I'm looking at the sports book there, and it's, again, just looking at the pictures, it looks a lot more intimate than what I saw at the Caesars in Vegas. But then again, you're going to be in Atlantic City, and it's newer there, and it's not going to be as big there as it obviously has been in Vegas. But it looks just like a fun atmosphere. Maybe not as much alone. I have a feeling if the two of us were together, we could really have a lot of fun. Even if we lost, we would be having a lot of fun just in the atmosphere. It's an atmosphere where you can eat, you can drink, you can watch the games, you can make your bets. I mean, the casinos, they know what they're doing when they set these places up. The ones I saw in Mississippi were like that. They were much more intimate settings than the ones I saw in Vegas, but they were appealing, and I could see myself being drawn. I could sit here. I could watch these games. I could bet on this stuff. I could have fun. So, and you're right, though. I could see us in the future being on the phone or on this podcast, and I can't get to Vegas quick enough. Oh, I don't have to anymore. I can just literally do it on my phone. Yep.
We should tell the listeners, that's been our running joke forever. It's like, I can't get to Vegas fast enough to place a bet on something because we've said something, right?
Yep. And inevitably it happens. And it's like, yeah, there you go. We called it.
I'm assuming that our listeners probably don't believe us because we've been so bad at our picks that we've made on air. So we need to redeem ourselves. And I'm really going to try to redeem myself with these prop bets.
Let's get into these. Let's talk about what you will or will not be betting on, because you literally could bet on almost anything here as I'm looking through this sheet. My God.
So the question will be, because I'm looking at the Superbook from Vegas, I'm not sure what prop bets they're going to be offering in Atlantic City. They may not offer all these prop bets. I have no idea. So I'm kind of flying by the seat of my pants when I go down there. But I did find some interesting bets that I liked on this sheet. Now, when we talked about the game earlier, one of the things I think is going to happen is I think that 2.5 points for the Patriots is too low. I think the Patriots are going to win by more than a touchdown. If you go down to the alternate point spreads, I can actually bet the Patriots minus 7.5 at a plus 200, which means I put $100 down. If the Patriots win by 8 or more, I win $200.
I see that.
That's a bet I'm going to place. Another bet that I'm going to place, absolutely. It was one of these things as I was thinking about games in the past, and I remember a lot of these games, but it seems like it takes a while for the teams to like get over the jitters and warm up. So you can actually place a bet on the over-under for the first quarter. The over-under is 10.5 points in the first quarter. What if I told you that only twice in the last 20 years, the last 20 Super Bowls, that's a big sample size for gambling, right? Only twice has it gone over 10.5.
That would seem to indicate to go with the under.
I'm going to go even one step further. What if I told you that in 10 of the last 20 Super Bowls, there have been 3 points or less scored in 10 of those games? 10 out of 20.
I think you
3
mentioned
points or less.
The jitters have something to do with it. In this case, it may not be Patriot jitters because they've been here before. They were here last year. But the Rams certainly could have some jitters coming into this game. Exactly.
Sure, I could see the Patriots be up 10-0 at the end of the first quarter. That's a win.
That's a win.
That's a win, and more than that's a really good win.
Very good win
me on my way.
At that point. Yeah.
Yeah, it gets me on my way.
Are you betting on the coin toss? You got to kind of bet on the coin toss, don't you? I mean, isn't that the sign that you have a gambling addiction if you're betting on the coin toss? Not that you have a gambling addiction. I'm not implying you do, because you don't, but it just feels like the coin toss is one of those that just gets you right going one way or the other, doesn't it?
There used to be bets even before the coin toss, because you could bet on how long the rendition of the national anthem was.
I remember
I
that.
do not see that bet on here, and I'm not even sure who is singing the national anthem. I may have to look that up. There's a lot of really interesting random bets. You can bet on the first team to use the coach's challenge. Talk about a coin toss type of bet.
I like it how it says excludes official challenges from the league. So that's
yes,
if it's something that where they're reviewing where it's an automatic, it doesn't count.
Right. And I noticed that it's basically even money for either team. I wonder what those odds would be if Andy Reid was one of the coaches. I bet those odds would be a lot
different.
You know, could you make a bet on the over under of when Andy Reid makes a bad challenge?
That would be a funny bet.
5 minutes into the game, 10 minutes into the game.
Other strange ones like that, like you have first receptions by, and you have players. I'm not even sure who this guy is, but you can bet on him if this is the thing. Will a team convert their first third down attempt? You can bet for whether or not the Patriots or the Rams will convert. Which, by the way, it notes third down conversions by penalty do not count. So, a bad call on a pass interference play, or perhaps a non-call. Not that anyone down here in the New Orleans area is still bitter about that. These things,
bitter party of one.
Yes, those don't count for this. But yeah, you can bet on that. You can bet on the first punt by the punter. What's the gross yardage on it? If they don't punt, you get your bet refunded, and it must be an official punt as compared to the unofficial punt, I guess, where again there might be a penalty and it takes it back and gets an automatic first down, and that gets wiped away. So you can bet on the punter. You can bet on what the punters are doing. That's crazy, but they're taking action on that, right? I mean, there's other bets here that are obvious. The team to score first. You said you like the Patriots. The Rams may have jitters. Well, there's a bet for that. Team to score last. You can bet on longest made field goal of the game. Will either team make a field goal in the fourth quarter? I mean, what's the first score of the game? Touchdown or any other score? I mean, it's just some of these bets are just completely out there, but they're getting action on it, right?
Here's some interesting bets. I don't know if you remember last year's Super Bowl, both kickers missed an extra point.
And that's a bet you can take.
That's a bet. You can bet if Greg Zuerlein misses a extra point, that's a plus 550. Now, you have two really accurate kickers here, right?
Yes, you do.
These are probably the ones that are least likely to miss extra points, but that's something you can bet on. You can bet on the longest gross punt by Johnny Hecker. Here's another one that I found interesting. Total number of different players to have a passing attempt. The over-under is 2.5. So will there be a third person throwing a ball, whether it's a Johnny Hecker with a fake punt, or whether it's a
halfback option,
or whether one of the quarterbacks gets injured, and
you make this bet and Jared Goff gets crushed on a play and is slow to get up. You've got a bet down and you're screaming at the TV, send him to the tent, because you have money on a third person throwing a pass. These are the things you root for when you gamble, right?
Right. Let's say Jared Goff gets crushed. All right. They have to bring out the trainer, right? Because they bring the trainer out, he has to sit out for a play.
You're praying for third and long. That's what you're.
And it's third and long. You got to throw the ball, right? I mean, these are the weird things you root for.
You remember from the Super Bowl a few years back, the safety, right, where the Denver against Seattle, where the ball went past Manning back through the end zone, and it was the safety. And I remember at the time them commenting about what a big deal it was from a gambling standpoint. And you look at the odds. Will there be a safety plus 600? Will there be a safety in the first half plus 1,000? You're getting some good odds there, right? I mean, throw some money down, right?
There's been a lot of super safeties. What if I told you that there have been 9 safeties in Super Bowl history 4 of them have occurred in the last 10 years.
I'd say that whoever's been putting money down on a safety in the Super Bowl over the last whatever number of years is probably up at this point, right? Even if you weren't betting in the halves, which obviously give you even better odds, you're just betting on a safety in general because it's not specifying by team on these prop bets. It's literally either team with a safety. Then you've done well if that's what you've bet.
There was a 3-year stretch where there was a safety in all 3 games.
That guy who was betting that was whoever those people were eating well the next day because those odds are really, really good.
I will state, though, that there is limits to these prop bets. You cannot place, I want to say it was like $1,000 or a $10,000 limit on the prop bets. You can't place more than that. And the other thing you can't do with most of these prop bets is you can't parlay them together. So you can only make straight bets, no parlays.
So here's a bet that I like. Will there be a 2-point conversion attempt? And if I'm reading this correctly, it's favored that there will not be one. The no is minus 170. Yes, plus 145. Doesn't it feel like nowadays with missed extra points and just in general, you have 2 coaches who are both aggressive and 2 teams you certainly could see going for 2, particularly if a team gets up by a good bit. You may see a team playing catch up. That seems to me to be a pretty decent bet right there, that there's going to be at least 1 2-point conversion. Not a successful. That's an entirely different bet. But just an attempt, that seems like a good bet to make. You know, I would say that would be a prop bet I would put money on, at least 1 throughout the whole game.
You mentioned earlier you were taking the under.
I think I did, yes.
Do you think that there's going to be somewhere between 2 and 7 total points scored? Because you could get 1,000 to 1 odds on that.
I think it's going to be a little higher scoring than that. But just the fact I could bet on that is remarkable.
Let's say you think New England's going to win 21-16, right?
Okay.
That's 37 points, right?
Yep.
If you bet between 36 and 40 points, you get 10 to 1 odds. You can literally do bets on anything. You can say that you think New England is going to win by 39 or more points, and you get 60 to 1 odds.
That would be a heck of a limb to go out on.
You can bet on which quarter is going to be the highest scoring quarter.
Now that makes sense. That seems like a legitimate bet to potentially make there.
Here are some of the more fun bets, though. These are when you get into really some crazy, weird bets because they're cross sports bets. So here's a bet that's on the board. Who will have more? James Harden points. The Rockets are playing the Jazz on Super Bowl Sunday. Or the longest touchdown of the Super Bowl, minus 9.5. So if James Harden scores 50 points, as long as the longest touchdown of the game is, so if the longest touchdown of the game is 60 yards and you have James Harden, you lose.
I'm looking at some of these. Who's going to have more? Golden State's first half points or Brandon Cook's receiving yards?
What if I told you that's a bet I'm going to make? It is on my list.
It is on your list. I hit one there. There you go.
It is. Golden State is playing the Lakers at home. Whether or not LeBron is playing is still up in the air. Even if he is, he's still just going to be back after being out for 4 to 6 weeks or however long it's been with his groin injury. Last Monday, the Warriors played at LA and scored 65 points in the first half. And they've just been scoring a ridiculous number of points in this 11-game winning streak that they're on. And I really feel like Brandon Cooks is going to be the guy that New England's going to want to try to take out of the game. So I'm taking Golden State on that. I'm going to do that. It's minus 110. So I put up 110 to win 100. I'll be taking that bet.
I noticed they have, I don't see lines on it. And I'm guessing it's because of the nature of LeBron. You mentioned LeBron may not play because one of the prop bets on here would be who will have more, LeBron James points or Tom Brady completions. And I'm like, well, that's a really good bet if you could get money down now and James doesn't play. But I do note that it apparently is not on the board right now. I don't see odds for that. And I'm guessing that's because of the status of James potentially not playing. And they have another one, free throws missed by LeBron versus Chris Hogan receptions.
There's some random stuff. There's a college basketball player from South Dakota State that you can bet on, okay? Mike Daum from South Dakota State, his points versus Gerald Everett's receiving yards. You can make a bet on that. I've never even heard of the guy. You barely even knew who Gerald Everett was.
Here's another one. Kentucky is playing Illinois Chicago.
No. That's not Kentucky. That's Northern Kentucky.
Oh, Northern Kentucky. That's right. Northern Kentucky is playing Illinois Chicago. Two powerhouses in the college basketball landscape. So you can bet on the shortest made field goal of the Super Bowl versus the number of 3-point field goals made by those two teams in that game. Who bets that?
In the Horizon League. Yes.
Who bets that? I have some familiarity with the casino industry. There's a number in the bathroom that if you're making bets on things like this, you might consider giving a call to that 1-800 number. If you're analyzing these things in depth and putting money down on some of these more obscure bets.
Here's another one that I like that I'm going to be placing a bet on. Okay. Who will have more? Ricky Fowler's 4th round score in the Phoenix Open. Now, obviously, he has to actually make the cut to get to the 4th round, right? So that is one of the stipulations of the bet versus the total yardage of all touchdowns in the Super Bowl, minus 18.5. I like that because Ricky Fowler is probably going to shoot somewhere in the vicinity of 70, right? Maybe a few shots above, a few shots below. I think there's a good chance that there's going to be at least one long touchdown in the game, a 40 or 50-yard touchdown. That gets you a long way there, right?
It does.
And I have a feeling betting the over, I like the fact that there's going to be some touchdowns. So that's a bet I like. You don't even have to bet on things that are happening in this country. I can bet on the number of Arsenal Manchester City goals they're playing on Sunday versus the number of Rob Gronkowski receptions. That's a pick 'em, by the way. So if you figure Arsenal Manchester City, maybe that's like a 3-1 score. Do you think Rob Gronkowski is going to have more than 4 receptions?
Before we get to your act, because you said you had a list, right? You have things already.
I've mentioned
some.
Before
we go over that, because I think our listeners we'll get your picks here out in the open. But before we do, the one last point I'll make before we actually talk about your picks, and then we'll talk about a couple of the, like I said, the odds going into next season. And again, we have other side bets, and we're not going to go through all the odds on it, but you can bet big ones as far as who's going to be the Super Bowl MVP. I think it's funny if you want to bet on Gostkowski to be the Super Bowl MVP. That'd be 100-1. That would be a heck of a nice little payoff, right? You can bet on who's going to score the first touchdown, the first touchdown of the second half, first touchdown for the Pats, for the Rams. And then, of course, you can bet final scores for the game. And there are some, like you said, ridiculous odds on some of these things. And, of course, the total number of points, like you said, 1,000-1 on that. We mentioned before, we play fantasy sports. And whenever we're surrounded by people who don't play or don't realize what we're doing, the funniest thing in the world is to be watching a game, whether it's live at a stadium or in a public setting in front of a TV, and have somebody give you the strangest look in the world when you root for something, and then you go ahead and 5 minutes later you're cheering or rooting for something that seems to be in complete opposition to what you were just rooting for. It makes you look insane, doesn't it? For instance, like we'll watch a baseball game and you'll cheer because some player on let's say the Red Sox hits a home run, and someone around you might be like, oh, it's a Boston fan. And then the next inning, somebody from Toronto hits a home run and you cheer then too. And they're looking at you like you have some split personality or some dissociative personality disorder, because why would you be cheering for both of these teams? What's wrong with you? Are you just cheering for home runs? Do you even know what you're doing? And yet we're doing so because it's from a fantasy standpoint. From a gambling standpoint, it's kind of the same thing, right? The people who are making these prop bets, in some cases, will be rooting for some of just the strangest things to happen, like I said, you make that safety bet, you're not going to care who gets it. You could be wearing a Pats jersey and Brady could get sacked in the end zone and you could be jumping up and down and whooping it up and somebody would look at you like you were insane. But that's what gambling does. It makes you look at things from a very different perspective sometimes. So, which leads us into the perspective you'll have, right?
Well, mentioning you said that the MVP, Tom Brady has won the Super Bowl 5 times. 4 of those years he won the MVP.
He's even money on that.
Okay. You mentioned a kicker. A kicker has never won the MVP.
That's why it's 100-1, I'm guessing.
We have had some defensive MVPs. 2 of the last 5 have actually been defensive MVPs. But most of the time it's a quarterback. That's not something I'm going to take. I'm going to go through the bets that I'm going to place, the prop bets. Even though I picked New England to win -2.5, I am not going to place that bet. The bet I will play is New England -7.5. If I put down 100, it's a $200 payoff. I will also, as I mentioned earlier, be taking -125. So I have to put down 125 to win 100. I'm going to take an under 10.5 points in the first quarter. So those are my first 2 bets. I will take tails as my opening coin toss bet. Taking tails. The other bet that I'm going to take, and we didn't talk about it, I found kind of I don't know if it's a discrepancy or just some weirdness in this. Will either team score 3 straight times? If you bet no, that's a +180. Okay. When you go to will either team score 4 straight times, that goes to a -310. That's a big swing for one score. So I like the neither team will score 3 straight times at +180.
I like that.
I'm going to take that bet. Moving on, I am going to take total receiving yards by James White, 44.5. I have a feeling he's going to have a big day.
I'd take the over.
Because I feel like the strength of the defense of the Rams is their cornerbacks. They're not going to be putting a cornerback on James White. I think that's going to be the weakness there. So I'm going to say James White. We talked when we were watching the NFC title game, and the Saints had a tremendous amount of success running pass plays with Alvin Kamara.
They did.
Tremendous amount. I think that they're going to do the exact same thing, and it's going to be James White. Total receptions by Julian Edelman, 6.5. I'm going to go over. I have a feeling Julian Edelman might be a guy who has a big game. We did mention at when we talked about the AFC title game that he moved into second place in most postseason receptions. So he's a guy who gets a lot of passes thrown his way, and he typically catches everything that's thrown to him. Here's another one that I did a little research on. Total passing yards by Jared Goff. Okay, 285 is the over/under. I'm going to take the over because I have a feeling they're going to be behind and they're just going to end up throwing the ball a lot. Keeping in mind that other times New England has allowed quarterbacks to throw for a lot of yards. Nick Foles threw for 373 yards last year. A few years ago, McNabb threw for 357. The immortal Jake Delhomme for Carolina threw for 323. In that first Super Bowl that the Brady Patriots were in against Kurt Warner, he threw for 365. Eli in one of the 2 Super Bowls threw for 296. Matt Ryan threw for 284, and if they hadn't had such a huge lead, he probably would have thrown for a lot more than that, right? That most of that 284 was in the first half.
Correct.
I just feel like they're going to give up some passing yards. They'll be willing to do that.
They tend to bend and not break. That's the idea.
Exactly. Conversely, total receiving yards by Brandon Cooks, I'm going to take the under, 75.5. So I think they're going to really make a big effort to limit his ability to do things. Plus, it's kind of a revenge game for him, right? This is part of his revenge tour. Last week, it was New Orleans. This week, it's New England. So
the Brandon Cooks revenge tour. Yeah, T-shirts available at the concession stand, I'm sure, during the Super Bowl.
There would be if it was the Tom Brady / Julian Edelman revenge tour, right? They're just looking for any chip to put on their shoulder.
Yeah.
We mentioned earlier the Warriors' first half points versus Brandon Cooks' receiving yards. As I mentioned, I felt like Brandon Cooks was going to be limited. So, and I like the Warriors scoring a ton of points at home against the Lakers. So I'm going to take that. And I mentioned the Ricky Fowler versus total yardage in all touchdowns. I do like the total yardage. I believe that might be the last of my bets.
So that's your official prop bet list for the Super Bowl.
That's my official prop bet list. I'm not going to bet on the most valuable player. I'm not going to bet on any of these. Like,
there is a method to your madness on what you're doing there. There's definitely.
And there is. I didn't do much work today and spent a lot of time kind of scoping this 36-page document of crazy, ridiculous, stupid bets. And I'm going to be part of it.
When I bought my house, I don't think the document pages were that many. I think that's longer than what it was when I did my mortgage. That's a lot of betting sheets for this game. That says something.
There was a lot less risk when you bought your house.
That's probably true. Who was that again you were doing the bet with? It was Ricky.
The golfer?
The golfer, Ricky
Fowler. Ricky Fowler.
Can I make a Ricky Bobby bet for the Super Bowl? Do they have that somewheres in the 36 pages? Because, you know, if you ain't first, you're last, right? That's the saying, right? No Ricky Bobby bets here. That's sad. I'm disappointed.
You could bet penalty yards. I just saw that. I didn't notice that before. Total penalty yards for the Rams.
I guess that would depend on which crew is working this game. I'm assuming it's not going to be the crew we saw here in New Orleans for that travesty against the Rams. I'm guessing the only way they're going to be anywhere near this Super Bowl is if they're buying a ticket to get in.
My guess is they might be on the list of people who aren't even allowed in anywhere near this game.
I'm thinking so. And one quick note, you did see the comment about so many of the officials having LA ties, like where they lived or in their vicinity. And we're not going to go into depth here. This can be for a later podcast or whatever, because we're running towards the end here. And I did want to talk really quick about 2020 odds. The thing about that is simply, we talk all the time about the appearance of impropriety. And again, how does the NFL not catch that and think maybe this would look bad just in case there's bad officiating? Because, you know, if I'm running the NFL, I can't possibly think there could be bad officiating, except there always seems to be. I would think that would have raised a red flag somewheres where someone would have said, hey, you know, a lot of these guys are from LA or have ties to LA. Maybe they shouldn't be working this game. And apparently that completely went under the NFL's radar, like so many other things do. But that's something that's come out since then, fueling conspiracy theories here. So
I mentioned to you that I really thought that piece is going to be the thing that sinks Al Riveron, the head of NFL officiating, that they're going to have to fire him, that he would have allowed that to happen. Honestly, I don't think that there's anything in that. I don't think anyone from LA cares that much about the Rams to make a call.
They're too indifferent.
Yeah, exactly. So I don't really think that's the case. But like you said, the appearance of impropriety sometimes is just as bad as as something being done nefariously anyway. I mean, there's just no reason to do that. You have two teams, right? Just don't select any officials from the Gulf South and Southern California, and you should be fine.
They did mention that none of the officials working this game have any ties geographically to or in any other way to either the New England area or the Southern California, Los Angeles area. So at least they have that taken care of for the Super Bowl. So, you know, again, in New Orleans, there are conspiracy theories flying all over the place down here. But, you know, as they would say down here, you know, one game too late for that being a draw.
Can I change my pick?
Why? Already? Do you have the Ron Burgundy? Do you immediately regret this decision? Clip? Already?
The referee is the same referee where Eli Manning beat the Giants in Super Bowl 46.
Oh, okay. But that wasn't really an officiating situation where the Pats lost to the Giants. I still don't know how the Pats lost to the Giants. We talked about Nick Foles' deal with the devil. Maybe, he's down there sunning himself. He might be sitting next to Eli at some point, too, because I still have no idea how those Giant teams beat, especially that 16-0 Pats team. I still have no idea how they won that game. That is one of the greatest sports upsets One of these days we'll do a podcast on greatest upsets, because we've talked about a few over the years, and that certainly has to be up there.
That was not the undefeated team. That was
the other one.
This was the second time that they.
But that one was just as unlikely, because that Giant team just wasn't that good. Neither of those Giant teams were all that good.
Here's the thing. The Vegas line was Pats -3. The thing I'm seeing is, as I'm looking at the box score of that game, this will be the last thing we talk about, there's a lot of players who scored in that game who are no longer in the NFL. In fact, there's one person who's no longer alive.
Oh.
Victor Cruz caught a touchdown pass. Danny Woodhead, who's no longer in the NFL, caught a pass. Aaron Hernandez caught a pass.
I figured that was the one that wasn't alive.
Yeah. Yep. Lawrence Tynes, who's no longer in the NFL, had a couple of field goals as well as an extra point. And Ahmad Bradshaw, who's no longer in the NFL. Eli Manning is part of that game. He plays like he's no longer in the NFL, but
like he shouldn't be in the NFL anymore. But
exactly. Let me see if there was any penalties in that game.
I don't remember it being a game where it's like the officials were dictating the pace in either one of those games. The thing I remember about those two games were New England's offense just could never seem to get in sync, and they just weren't moving the ball the way you expected them to and putting up points the way you expected them to. And those games just stayed closer. And in the end, the Giants made the plays they needed to at the end. That's what I remember about both of those Super Bowls. But again, I'm still to this day shocked Eli Manning has 2 Super Bowl rings. And that's no slight against Eli. It's just they were not the better team in either one of those Super Bowls. And yet, it does come down to one game.
There were 9 penalties for 52 total yards in that game. So looks like maybe illegal procedure, false start, offsides type penalties, short penalties.
To wrap it up, the last thing I would think we would talk about, since we're talking about gambling, is you threw up here 2020 odds, and we mentioned that very briefly during the course of this podcast about teams and dynasties and the like, because we mentioned Philly. Currently, the 2020 odds actually have the Rams as your early favorites for 2020 at 6-1, Kansas City at 7-1, the Saints at 8-1, New England at 10-1. So the irony of the team favored this week is not favored ahead of the team that they're playing for next year. Then the Chargers and the Bears are at 12-1. As a Bears fan, I'm kind of skeptical at that, but we'll see. Pittsburgh at 14-1. Minnesota, Green Bay at 16-1, Philly, Dallas, Baltimore, Indy at 20-1. And then you start getting into your really long shots. But it goes back to what we were saying about the Philly, quote unquote, dynasty probably being already over, is that they're lumped in with another team in their division in Dallas. And, they're behind how many other teams just in the NFC alone? That's 5 NFC teams ranked in front of them by odds at the moment. The thing you brought up, the real long shots, Denver at 80-1, and that was a team you mentioned kind of collapsed quickly once Manning was gone. You have the teams at 100-1, Washington, Detroit, the Jets, Buffalo, Cincinnati, Oakland, and Arizona. And that was really some of the worst teams we saw in football this year. It's a team in Washington who I don't think has a quarterback for next year, because I'm really thinking Alex Smith's career may be over with, unfortunately. But then you brought up the anomaly, the bizarre Miami is your longest shot at 300-1. I'm flabbergasted. And not because I think Miami's any good, but are they really 3 times as bad as Oakland or Arizona?
Didn't Miami finish like 500 this year?
They fired their head coach. They will have a new coach. They may end up having a new quarterback at some point, because Ryan Tannehill is not their answer, but they finished 7-9. Now, their point differential, to be fair, was worse than the Jets and Buffalo. So that 7-9 mark might have been better than it should have been. They finished the season on a 3-game losing streak. They were 7-6 and in the playoff conversation through 13 games. How are they worse than Oakland? Oakland's a dumpster fire. Arizona had a negative 200 point differential last year. So Arizona not only went 3-13 and had the worst record in football, but their point differential was by far and away the worst. The second worst was the Raiders. They were a negative 177. The third worst point differential actually was Miami at -114. So Miami, even at 7-9, was not as good as that 7-9 record might have indicated. And I think we talked about it before we started the podcast. I don't think any of those teams are winning the Super Bowl. I don't think 300-1 is high enough odds for any of those teams. Oakland at 100-1, I don't want to put $10 on that. Oakland's not winning a Super Bowl next year. No way. I think the point I made was you have Buffalo and the Jets at 100-1, right? That's teams in Miami's division with the Patriots. So the assumption is, if you looked at the odds, New England is going to win yet another AFC East title next year. But there's a path for Miami to finish second in the division and therefore make the playoffs. What path does Oakland have to make the playoffs? You have Kansas City and the Chargers are both in that top group of teams projected in their eyes to be Super Bowl contenders, right? In order for Oakland to even make the playoffs, if those two teams are better, you would need both wild cards to come from the AFC West. And that just doesn't happen very often. So just by that definition, Oakland should be worse odds than Miami because there's almost no chance they have of making the playoffs because they're not going to finish ahead of both Kansas City and the Chargers, either of them. I don't understand where they're coming up with the difference to say Miami belongs with those type of odds compared to these other terrible teams. To me, they're all lumped in the same basket of none of these teams are winning a Super Bowl. And I wouldn't waste $10 on any of them to win. I don't care what you can't give me high enough odds to even throw $10 on it. I'd rather get a combo meal at Wendy's for $10. And it'll probably be cold and the fries will be terrible and it'll be unsatisfying, and that'll still be a better use of my $10 than throwing it away on any of these teams at these odds. My own opinion.
Well, I was skeptical when I first saw it, so I looked at other sports books, and all of the sports books have Miami by far like the worst team. I don't really get it. You said they were a 7-9 team. They have some decent players. There are other teams that are far higher on the list, whether it be Jacksonville or the Giants or Tampa Bay, that are far higher that I don't think are better teams than Miami.
I would only disagree in that you could make an argument to me that Jacksonville could make it and win a Super Bowl. You could say, well, their defense will rebound.
With who as a quarterback?
Somebody they get in the offseason? I don't know.
But here's the thing. They don't have a quarterback now. So you can't. So that bet right there, that 30-1 on Jacksonville.
I wouldn't say I would take that bet. That's not me. But, there's Atlanta.
Are they 10 times more likely to win the Super Bowl than Miami?
I don't know if they're 10 times more likely.
There's no path. They're not getting past Kansas City. They have to get past Kansas City, Pittsburgh, New England. Just in their own division, they have to get past Indianapolis. They're a team at 20-1, I think is a good bet, right?
Houston, who went 11-5, has the same odds as Jacksonville does. That makes no sense.
It makes no sense at all.
I will say that you could make a argument. It's not a great argument, and it's not one I would necessarily adhere to, but you could make an argument to say this is how Jacksonville makes a Super Bowl. I don't think there's any way you can make that argument about the teams at the very bottom. Like, there's no way I can picture Arizona. There's nothing you could tell me that would show me how Arizona makes a Super Bowl, or Oakland, or Cincinnati, or the Jets. I think Miami's in that group, but I think it's kind of the same thing. I can see where Jacksonville would be ranked higher than Miami. I don't think either one of them is going to make it. I don't think there's any chance of it because those all get lumped into I wouldn't even put $1 on it. The dollar would be wasted. There are teams like Cleveland's 30-1. I'm not saying Cleveland's that close, but we mentioned, they finished almost at 500. They were just a beat away from winning a couple games here and there. They could have easily gotten to 10-6. They could have won that division.
Hugh Jackson was their coach the first part of the season. They lost some just absolute heartbreakers that first month of the season. They win a couple of those. They're already in playoff contention.
Yeah. I mean, what is if we look at these odds, Green Bay is 16-1, right? And they have Aaron Rodgers, obviously, is always your factor. Cleveland had a better record than they did. They also had a better point differential than Green Bay did last season. So that's something to consider. I would say out of all those, Cleveland would be one of those teams that I would say, well, 30-1. I'm a Cleveland fan. I might throw $10 down on that, just to have something to root for. But I think the ultimate thing that you can take out of this, and it's about all this gambling and all the sports betting and everything, is I have a little bit of casino background in me. And I can tell you there's a reason why the tile is new and the decorations are very ornate and the buffets are filled with all these different foods and everything looks fancy and everything looks really nice at most of these casinos. It's because they don't do this to not make money, right? Somebody out of that group obviously is winning the Super Bowl, right? There's going to be a Super Bowl winner next year. So somebody will win. But there's a reason why casinos make money, and that's because all the rest of those teams are not winning. Whoever wins, the other ones won't. And there'll be a lot of money bet on various teams to win here and there. And it's just going to be money thrown out the window because that's just the way gambling works, right? But not your gambling, not your prop bets. We're going to be confident. We are going to be 100% confident that you are coming through and redeeming us. This is your redemption tour. As you go to Atlantic City, it's your revenge tour to vindicate the fact that we're not idiots, that we actually might know a little bit about something we're talking about. This pressure is on you. You have to bring it home. You're not saying anything. This is concerning to me. You need to be confident.
I am confident. I have so much confidence, I don't even need to talk about it. I'm so confident. So, hello, this is Steven. I have returned from Atlantic City. And one of the things I realized once I got down there was that they didn't have a 36-page document of prop bets. They did have about a 6-page document. So I had to make some adjustments of what bets that I made. So I wanted to give an update of what bets I actually made so that we can put this into the podcast, and we'll come back on Monday to review how I did. So here are the bets that I did place. I placed a bet for which happens first for the Rams, a punt or a score. I bet on a punt minus 115. I placed a bet on whether the game will have a safety. I bet yes. That was a plus 650. I bet on will there be a successful 2-point conversion? Yes, plus 190. I did take that first quarter total points under. That was at minus 140. So the odds actually went down for that, unfortunately, but I still like the bet. I did take the alternate point spread, Patriots minus 7.5. That went up to a plus 215. I did take the Jared Goff total passing yards over 283.5. That's a plus 110. And the final bet that I took is Brandon Cooks total receiving yards under 72.5. That number actually went up a little bit from when we were talking about it originally in the podcast. And that's at a minus 110. So those are the bets I placed. We'll see how we did on Monday. We'll close it at that. We'll be back next week looking back at the Super Bowl, looking back at our picks, looking back at
celebrating our victories, right?
Yes. My goal here is to take a few $100s and not come back with like $10 or $20.
It's a modest goal.
I feel very good about these bets. Of course, if the Rams blow out the Patriots, I basically lose every bet. So I'm putting all my eggs into one basket, but I am confident that Tom Brady is going to deliver, and the rest of the Patriots are going to deliver on this. So with that, we'll see you next week reviewing our picks, and thanks for listening. We appreciate it.
Thank you for listening to the Excruciating Minutiae Podcast. Check us out at excruciatingpodcast.com. Please subscribe to our podcast on any of your favorite podcast platforms and follow us on Twitter at excruciatingpod. See you at the next episode.